The sun beats down on Redemption Gulch, a physical weight that presses the dust into the street and saps the will from every soul caught in its glare. On a crude wooden platform, a girl stands. She can't be more than 19. Her dress is faded, her hands are clasped tight over the slight swell of her belly, and her gaze is fixed on a splinter in the floorboards, refusing to meet the eyes of the men below. Their murmurs are a low hum, like flies buzzing over something left to rot. Above them all, a man's voice, honed by years of practice, cuts through the heat. It's a voice of command, a value assigned and bargain struck. But for a fleeting, imperceptible moment, it falters. A crack in the granite. For the man wielding the gavel, the auctioneer Jedediah Stone, has just seen the tarnished silver locket hanging around the girl's neck. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The locket is small, crudely shaped like a meadow lark, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. It's a ghost, a phantom from a life Jedediah had buried under 2 decades of dust, distance, and a name that wasn't his own. He feels the blood drain from his face, a cold shock in the oppressive heat. He forces his eyes away, back to the crowd, his professional mask sliding back into place. He cannot afford this. Not now. Not here. The girl is an orphan, the town councilman had explained. Found destitute, a burden on the community. An indenture auction was the most practical solution. A strong back for some rancher, a housekeeper for a lonely widower. Practical. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. Jedediah Stone had made a career of practicality. He'd drifted into this life the way a log drifts into a swamp, slowly, then all at once. He sold cattle, land, foreclosed farms, and yes, sometimes people. Indentured servants, debtors, orphans. He told himself it was just business, a service that brought order to the messy edges of frontier life. He was the voice that turned desperation into a number, a transaction. It paid well enough and kept him moving, which was the most important thing. Moving meant he didn't have to remember the man he used to be, the man with a wife named Eleanor and a baby daughter whose laughter was the only music that ever mattered. The man who had carved a matching pair of meadowlark lockets from a single silver dollar. The bidding began. Jedediah's voice was mechanical, detached. He didn't look at the girl. He couldn't. He focused on the bidders. A farmer with calloused hands and weary eyes. A portly saloon owner, his gaze slick with a different kind of appraisal. And Silas Croft, a landowner whose cruelty was as well known as the size of his holdings. Croft's lips were curled in a smug smile, as if he were bidding on a prize mare. $5, the farmer mumbled. 10, the saloon owner called out, licking his lips. 20, Croft's voice boomed, silencing the others. He wanted her, and he had the coin to ensure he got her. Jedediah's knuckles were white around the handle of his gavel. Every instinct screamed at him to stop this, to leap from the platform and shield the girl from their predatory eyes. But that would be madness. It would invite questions he couldn't answer and place her in even greater danger. In a town like Redemption Gulch, a disruption was a threat, and threats were dealt with harshly. The system was a relentless current. You couldn't fight it head-on. You had to navigate it. Or, in his case, manipulate it. He saw the girl flinch as Croft's bid echoed in the silence. Her hand went instinctively to the swell of her stomach, a gesture of protection so fierce and primal it struck Jedediah to his core. That was his blood on that platform, his grandchild beneath her hand. The life he thought had been extinguished in a fire, a lie he'd been told, a lie that had shattered him and sent him running, was standing 10 feet away, about to be sold to a monster. $20 from Mr. Croft, Jedediah announced, his voice tight. He scanned the crowd, looking for another bidder, anyone to drive the price up, to buy him time. There was no one. The farmer had shrunk back. The saloon owner shrugged, unwilling to cross a man like Croft. It was now or never. He had to enter the game he controlled. "Do I hear 25? He asked the silent crowd. He paused, letting the tension build. 21, he said, his voice dropping slightly, as if it were a reluctant bid from the back. A few heads turned, confused. An auctioneer didn't bid. Croft shot him a venomous look. "What trick is this, Stone?" "A proxy bid," Jedediah lied smoothly, his mind racing. For an interested party who wishes to remain anonymous, it was a flimsy excuse, but it was just plausible enough. 30, Croft snarled, his face reddening. 31, Jedediah countered immediately, his voice firm. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking at Croft. This was no longer an auction, it was a duel. The crowd began to mutter. This was unheard of. Croft was furious, his pride stung. He saw it not as a bid for a servant, but a direct challenge to his authority. $50, he roared, his voice shaking with rage. The sum was absurd, far more than any indenture was worth. It was a king's ransom meant to crush any opposition. A gasp went through the onlookers. The girl on the platform looked up for the first time, her eyes wide with terror, finally meeting Jedediah's. In that shared gaze, he saw Eleanor's eyes, the same shade of defiant green. It solidified his resolve into something unbreakable. He wouldn't counter with 51. He would end it. He raised his gavel high. $50 from Mr. Croft. Going once, going twice. He swung his gaze back to Croft, whose face was a mask of triumph. Then, Jedediah looked away, over the heads of the crowd, as if seeing a last-minute bidder. He smiled faintly. $100. The silence was absolute. Croft's jaw dropped. Who bids 100? He demanded, whirling around. Jedediah didn't answer. He brought the gavel down with a sharp, final crack that echoed like a gunshot in the still air. Sold, he declared, his voice ringing with an authority no one dared question. He pointed the gavel, not at some phantom bidder in the back, but directly at his own chest. To me. He paid the town councilman the $100 from the worn leather purse he carried, the sum nearly emptying his savings. The transaction was recorded, the indenture papers signed over to Jedediah Stone. He ignored the furious sputtering of Silas Croft and the bewildered stares of the townsfolk. He walked to the platform, his steps heavy. The girl, his daughter, shrank back as he approached, her eyes filled with the same fear she'd shown the other men. He had saved her from them, but to her, he was just another buyer, another unknown threat. Come on, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He offered a hand, but she ignored it, scrambling down from the platform on her own. He saw the fire in her, the stubborn pride that refused to accept help, and it was another painful echo of her mother. Their departure was swift and silent. He bought a sturdy, placid mare for her to ride and a pack mule for supplies, his movements efficient and grim. He didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to him. The questions hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Who are you? Why did you do this? What do you want from me? As they rode out of Redemption Gulch, the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows behind them, Alara finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Where are you taking me? Jedediah didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, a trail leading away from his tainted present and straight into the past he could no longer outrun. Somewhere safe, he grunted. It was the only answer he had, and it was woefully inadequate. The first few days on the trail were a study in silent tension. Jedediah was a man hollowed out by guilt. He watched her constantly, not as a warden, but as a man mesmerized by a miracle. He saw the way she moved, the slight tilt of her head, the determined set of her jaw, all phantoms of Eleanor. He rode ahead to clear the path, checked every campsite for snakes, and made sure she had the better portion of their meager meals of jerky and hardtack. He'd give her the thicker bedroll and take the thin blanket for himself, sleeping with his back to the fire, a gun resting by his hand. Alara watched him with cautious, intelligent eyes. She had survived the orphanage, survived betrayal, survived starvation. She knew the many faces of human cruelty and the even more dangerous face of transactional kindness. This man, Stone, was a puzzle. He had paid an impossible sum for her, yet he demanded nothing. He kept his distance, his face a granite mask of grim preoccupation. He hadn't tried to touch her, hadn't even spoken more than a handful of necessary words. Yet, his actions were ones of a protector. He'd once drawn his pistol with lightning speed when a rattlesnake slithered near her mare, dispatching it before she'd even had time to scream. He had simply tipped the dead snake off the path with his boot and moved on. One evening, a cold rain began to fall, soaking them through. Jedediah found a shallow overhang of rock that offered minimal shelter. He built a fire with practiced skill, its small flames pushing back the damp and the dark. He saw her shivering, her thin dress clinging to her. Without a word, he took off his own heavy duster, the canvas worn and smelling of trail dust and leather, and held it out to her. She hesitated, her mistrust warring with the bone-deep chill. "I'm fine," she said, her teeth chattering. "Don't be a fool," he said, his voice low. "It's not for you. It's for the child." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged her pregnancy so directly. The words changed the space between them. She took the coat, wrapping its heavy warmth around her shoulders. It was far too big, but it was a shield. She watched him as he hunkered down by the fire, his shirt soaked, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. In that moment, he looked less like a fearsome buyer and more like a man carrying an impossible burden. A few days later, they stopped in a small, flyspeck town to replenish their supplies. As Jedediah dealt with the shopkeeper, Alara waited outside with the horses. Two rough-looking drifters swaggered out of the saloon, their eyes landing on her. They saw a lone woman, and their smirks were ugly. "Well now, what have we here?" one of them drawled, stepping in front of her. "Lost, little lady." Alara stood her ground, her chin held high. "I'm not lost. I'm waiting for someone. We can keep you company till he gets back," the second man said, reaching for the bridle of her mare. Before his fingers could touch the leather, Jedediah was there. He moved with a quiet deadliness Alara had never seen. He didn't draw his gun. He simply placed himself between her and the men. He was taller, broader, and his eyes held a cold, flat promise of violence that was more terrifying than any weapon. "She's with me," he said, his voice a low growl. "Move along." The men bristled, not wanting to lose face. "Or what, old man?" the first one sneered. Jedediah didn't raise his voice. "Or I'll auction off what's left of your teeth." The drifters hesitated, took another look at the sheer, unyielding certainty in Jedediah's stance, and decided it wasn't a fight worth having. They backed away, muttering curses, and disappeared back into the saloon. Jedediah turned, his expression unreadable. He checked the straps on the pack mule, his movements precise, avoiding her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. He grunted in response, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. He was protecting her, but the effort seemed to pain him. That night, she noticed a tear in the sleeve of his shirt. While he was out checking on the horses, she took out the small sewing kit she kept in her meager bundle, a gift from a kind woman at the orphanage. With neat, small stitches, she mended the tear. It was a small act, a quiet reciprocation. When he returned, he saw the repaired sleeve, but said nothing. He simply added an extra strip of jerky to her plate. They traveled north, into higher country where the air grew thin and crisp, and the pines stood like sentinels on the rocky slopes. They heard whispers in one of the towns that a man named Croft was asking about an auctioneer and a pregnant girl, offering a reward. The news settled in Jedediah's gut like a cold stone. He pushed them harder, his urgency a palpable force. Finally, he led them to a place that felt like the edge of the world, a small, abandoned cabin nestled in a hidden valley, a clear stream running nearby. It was dilapidated but sound. "We'll stay here for a while," he announced. "Till the snows come. No one will find us." The cabin became their sanctuary. For the first time in weeks, they had a roof over their heads. They worked together in their now familiar silence. He repaired the leaky roof and shored up the chimney. She swept the floors, cleaned the single dusty window, and made the small space feel less like a shelter and more like a home. She found she was a good cook with limited ingredients, turning their bland supplies into savory stews. He found he was a decent hunter, bringing back rabbits and grouse. One evening, as she sat by the fire, her hands resting on her belly where the baby's kicks were growing stronger, she looked at him. He was carving a piece of wood, his brow furrowed in concentration. The firelight softened the hard lines of his face, revealing a deep-seated sadness she was beginning to understand was not anger, but grief. "Why?" she asked, the single word holding all her pent-up questions. "Why did you pay so much? You could have bought a whole farm for that much." He stopped carving. He stared into the flames for a long time, the silence stretching until it was taut. He had replayed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, and still, the words felt like jagged stones in his throat. He looked up, and his eyes, for the first time, were stripped of all their defenses. They were filled with a raw, aching vulnerability. "Because I had to," he said, his voice hoarse. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From a hidden fold, he took out a small object and placed it on the rough-hewn table between them. It was a piece of wood, dark with age, carved into the shape of a bird's wing. It was a perfect match to the locket that hung around her neck. Alara stared at it, her heart beginning to pound. "Your locket," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get it?" "It was my mother's," she said, her hand flying to her throat, clutching the worn silver. "It's all I have of her. Or my father. They died in a fire when I was a baby." Jedediah shook his head slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "I was told that too. I was told you both died." He finally looked at her fully, the weight of 20 lost years in his gaze. "Your mother's name was Eleanor. She had green eyes, and she loved meadowlarks. And my name? My real name isn't Jedediah Stone. It's Jacob Miller. And I am your father." The world tilted. Alara stared at him, at the carved wing, at the raw agony on his face. Disbelief was her first defense, a cold wall against the impossible. Then came anger, a hot, bitter wave. A father? This stranger, this hard man who had bought her like cattle? Where had he been her whole life? Through the lonely years in the orphanage, through the fear and the hunger. "You're lying," she choked out, though she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he was not. He told her everything. He told her about Eleanor, about their small homestead, about the joy she had brought them. He told her about the land dispute with a powerful rancher, a man much like Silas Croft. There had been threats, an ambush. Jacob had been forced to flee, leaving them for what he thought would only be a few days to lead the danger away. When he returned, the homestead was a smoldering ruin. He'd been told by a neighbor, a man paid by the rancher, that his wife and child were inside. Broken, believing his life was over, he had changed his name and started walking, never staying in one place for long, becoming the ghost named Jedediah Stone. As he spoke, Alara's anger began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, shared sorrow. She saw her own life of loss reflected in his. She saw the lonely, haunted man beneath the gruff exterior. She took off her locket and laid it on the table. He slid the wooden wing next to it, and the two pieces fit together perfectly, a broken thing made whole. Their new reality was fragile, tentative. He was not just her protector. He was her father. She was not his indenture. She was his daughter. They began to talk, filling in the empty spaces of their lives with stories. He learned of her quiet strength, her resilience. She learned of his deep regret, his unending love for the wife he had lost, and the daughter he thought was gone forever. The cabin, once a refuge from the world, became a place of healing. But the world was not so easily kept at bay. One afternoon, as snow clouds gathered over the peaks, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed through the valley. Jedediah, Jacob, was outside, chopping wood. He threw Alara a look of pure command. "Inside, or the door." He grabbed his own rifle from its place by the door just as 3 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing. In the lead was Silas Croft, his face a mask of vindictive triumph. "Nowhere left to run, Stone," Croft called out, his voice dripping with malice. "I've come for my property. I have a bill of sale, signed and legal." Jacob stepped forward, his rifle held loosely at his side. He was no longer the detached auctioneer. He was a father defending his home. "You have no business here, Croft. Ride out now." "I'm not leaving without the girl," Croft sneered. "I paid $50 for the winning bid, and you swindled me. But I'll take her instead of the cash." His eyes slid past Jacob to the cabin door, where Alara was watching through a crack. "There was a higher bid," Jacob stated, his voice dangerously calm. $100. Paid in full. A bid you made yourself." Croft spat. "That's fraud. The law will see it my way. Now step aside." Jacob planted his feet. The wind whipped at his coat, but he stood as immovable as the mountain behind him. "The law might see it as fraud," he said, his voice rising, carrying across the clearing with the same power it had on the auction block. "But this time it was filled with truth, not commerce. But it will also see this. She is not property. Her name is Alara Miller, and she is my daughter." Croft laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your daughter? A convenient lie, Stone. You're a lying cheat, And I'm taking what's mine. He raised his own rifle. At that moment, the cabin door creaked open. Alara stepped out, her fear eclipsed by a cold, fierce resolve. She held an old, rusty shotgun Jacob had found in the cabin, its barrels leveled squarely at Croft. "He's telling the truth," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He is my father, and you will leave us be." Croft's eyes widened, first in surprise, then in fury. To be defied by the auctioneer was one thing, but by the girl he considered little more than livestock? It was an insult he could not bear. "You'll regret that," he snarled, and brought his rifle to his shoulder. But Jacob was faster. He fired not at Croft, but at the ground just in front of his horse. The animal screamed and reared, throwing the surprised landowner into the dirt. Croft's two hired men, seeing the tables turn and the wild, protective fury in Jacob's eyes, had no stomach for this fight. They exchanged a look, wheeled their horses around, and galloped away, leaving their employers sputtering in the dust. Jacob walked over to the fallen man, his rifle aimed steady. Croft scrambled backward, his arrogance gone, replaced by fear. "Get up," Jacob ordered. "Get on your horse. And if you ever come near me or my family again, the next shot will not be a warning." Croft, humiliated and defeated, mounted his horse and rode away without a backward glance. The threat was gone. Jacob turned back to the cabin. Alara stood there, the heavy shotgun still in her hands, her face pale but resolute. He walked to her and gently took the weapon from her grip. He looked at her, truly looked at his daughter, standing strong and brave, protecting him as he had protected her. He saw Eleanor in her stance, but he also saw a strength that was all her own. He reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hand. Then he slowly knelt, his eyes level with her swollen belly, and placed a hand gently upon it. He felt the distinct flutter of a kick against his palm. His grandchild, a new life, a new beginning forged from the ashes of the old. "My family," he whispered, the words thick with emotion. He rose and put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Together, they stood in front of their small cabin, watching the last of the afternoon light fade behind the mountains. The air was cold, promising the harsh winter to come, but inside the circle of his arm, Alara felt nothing but warmth. The journey had been born of a brutal transaction, a sale of human life. But it had ended here, in this quiet valley, with a father and daughter and the promise of a future. They were no longer defined by an auction block, but by the resilient, unbreakable bond of family finally found. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more.